The deepest scars are the ones no one sees, until someone dares to touch them. Sometimes all it takes is a single, silent moment to shift an entire room, to reveal the weight of what someone has carried for decades. What happens when that silence speaks louder than any shout or threat? Let us know in the comments section below, and if you're watching with pride for our veterans, tell us where you're tuning in from. Moses Hadley never took his jacket off, not at the table, not in the diner, not even when the air conditioning made the windows sweat and the waitress offered to hang it by the door. The faded army green field jacket was threadbare at the shoulders and frayed at the cuffs, but it hung on him like a second skin. No one asked anymore. The regulars at Clyde's diner just knew. Moses wore his past like armor. He sat at the corner booth, same as always, his fingers curled loosely around a chipped ceramic mug. The patch above his heart, 1st Cavalry Division, had yellowed with age but still clung on, stitched in place decades ago in a tent 1,000 miles from any kind of peace. Moses didn't speak unless spoken to. Not out of coldness, but preservation. Words cost more than most people could afford to spend. But across the room, near the jukebox that hadn't worked right since the early 2000s, 3 men were speaking far too loudly. They weren't from around here. You could tell by the way they dressed. Brand new jeans with the factory creases still in them, logo caps pulled down low over smirking eyes, and attitudes just greasy enough to coat a spoon. "Look at this place," the tallest one barked, biting off the last word with a kind of amusement that didn't match his eyes. "Like a museum for people who still think Elvis is alive." The shorter one with the crooked tooth elbowed his friend, motioning toward Moses. "Check out Captain America over there. You think he ever actually saw a fight or just bought that jacket at a flea market?" They all laughed, sharp, brittle laughter that didn't belong in a room filled with Sunday regulars and the gentle clink of coffee cups. Behind the counter, Marnie froze mid-pour, her eyes darting toward Moses. He didn't move, just sipped, eyes down, hands steady. "I bet it's one of those surplus jackets, you know. Old guys wear 'em for sympathy," said the third man, who hadn't spoken yet but somehow seemed the cruelest of the 3. His voice was smooth, practiced. Then he stood up. Marnie took a step forward. "Sir." But he was already moving. The stranger walked past booths of people, pretending not to see, toward a man who hadn't said a word. Moses looked up, finally. Not afraid, not even annoyed, just present. "Hey, old-timer," the man said with a drawl that didn't come from any map. "Nice jacket. Where'd you steal it from?" Moses didn't answer. "Cat got your tongue?" The man grinned, reached forward, and then he did it. His fingers closed around the edge of the cavalry patch, the one that had stayed stitched through jungle storms, desert winds, and 2 divorces, and yanked. The sound was small, a dry rip, like the tearing of brittle leaves. The room stopped breathing. Marnie dropped the pot. It shattered at her feet. Moses looked down at the empty space on his chest. He didn't stand. Didn't flinch, just gently ran his fingers over the loose threads, as if searching for something long gone. The man laughed and tossed the patch onto the table. "Oops," he said. Didn't realize it meant that much. No one moved. Not the couple in the booth by the window, not the line cook behind the pass-through window, not even Clyde himself, whose name was on the building but whose legs suddenly felt like cardboard. The bell above the door chimed. A figure stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, his haircut, as crisp as his expression, was blank. Marine, everyone could tell, not because of the black T clinging to his chest or the dog tags swaying beneath it, but because he moved like someone who still measured distance in clicks and exits, in escape angles. He didn't say a word. His boots hit the tile floor like punctuation. The 3 strangers stopped, chuckling. The Marine walked past them like smoke slipping through a crack in the wall. Like they didn't matter. He bent at Moses' table, picked up the fallen patch. held it in both hands, palms up like it was a folded flag. Then turned to Moses and stood at attention. No words, just a sharp, crisp salute. Moses blinked and nodded. It was the only reply needed. The Marine turned and walked back out the way he came. Same rhythm, same silence, as if he'd only stepped in to honor a promise. The strangers didn't laugh any more. No one else in the diner looked at them. They were already ghosts. And Moses, he didn't put the patch back on. He just folded it carefully, tucked it in his jacket pocket, and looked out the window like he was seeing something the rest of them couldn't, something far away and burning with memory. The patch sat like a stone in Moses Hadley's pocket, heavier than it should have been, like it had soaked up all the voices that dared speak over it. He never touched it again that day. Didn't need to. His fingers knew it was there, the same way a man knows the contours of a scar without looking. Marnie, flustered and red-faced, offered him a fresh cup of coffee. Her hands were trembling too much to pour it right, but she did her best. Moses gave her a small nod, enough to say thank you without making her feel worse. She busied herself pretending the glass shards near her feet weren't there. Across the diner, the strangers had lost their swagger. They were still sitting, though one kept looking toward the door like he expected someone else to walk in next. Maybe a sheriff, maybe another Marine, maybe the weight of what they'd done, but that hadn't arrived yet. Shame had a way of showing up late and staying too long. No one else spoke. It was like the room itself was recovering from a sucker punch. People picked up forks and stirred cream into coffee, but the air hadn't gone back to normal. It was still thick with something that didn't have a name. Respect, guilt, reverence. Moses finally rose from his booth, slowly, not because he was fragile, but because he moved on his own time, like a man who had learned long ago that life wouldn't be rushed. The entire room watched him stand, though no one dared to look him in the eye. He adjusted the collar of his jacket and turned toward the register. "You don't need to pay for that, Mr. Hadley," Clyde said from behind the counter, his voice rough but earnest. "It's on the house." Moses hesitated. Then, very slowly, he reached into his wallet, peeled out a few crumpled bills, and laid them gently on the counter. Not as payment, but principle. A man doesn't let a moment of discomfort turn him into someone who takes. He had already paid his due 1,000 times over, just not here. Not yet. Clyde didn't argue. Moses turned toward the door, the bell above it still faintly swinging from the Marine's earlier exit. He didn't look back. The patch was in his pocket, the tear still raw on his chest. But he walked with dignity, his boots making a low, steady thump against the floor like a metronome marking time long after the music had stopped. He pushed through the door. The air outside was still. Not quiet, the world never really was, but still, like it was holding something back. The Marine was nowhere in sight, just the tail end of a license plate disappearing down the 2-lane road, headed out toward the highway. Moses paused on the stoop of the diner. For a moment, he just stood there, eyes narrowed. Then he reached into his pocket, ran a thumb over the edge of the patch, and looked up at the sky like he was measuring something that no one else could see. Back inside, people started to breathe again. The tall stranger, the one who'd ripped the patch, muttered something under his breath and headed for the door. His two friends followed a little slower, unsure whether to look ashamed or annoyed. No one stopped them. No one needed to. As the door closed behind them, Marnie turned to Clyde. "Was that—" she began, not sure how to finish. Clyde nodded. "That was Moses Hadley." "No," she said. "I mean the Marine. Do you know who that was?" Clyde rubbed the side of his face, thinking. No idea, but he knew who Moses was. Out in the parking lot, the strangers climbed into a glossy black SUV with out-of-state plates. Before the driver door shut, one of them looked back at the diner. Not at any person, but at the building itself. The place had turned on them. Not with violence, not even with words, just quiet, a silence that screamed. Moses didn't go home right away. He walked to the War Memorial Park just down the street, the one the city always forgot to weed, where the benches were uneven and the bronze plaques had gone green from time. He sat down, slowly, beneath a statue of a soldier no one remembered the name of, and watched the traffic go by. He didn't cry, didn't shake, just sat. He pulled out the patch and stared at it. The threads were jagged, torn, not unlike the wounds that didn't show up on X-rays. His thumb moved in circles over the embroidery, not fast, like prayer. Then finally he tucked it back into his pocket, folded his hands in his lap, and leaned back on the bench. The world didn't stop for Moses Hadley, but for the first time in a long while, it had paused, long enough for one young Marine to offer a salute to a man who thought maybe his service had been forgotten. He hadn't expected the recognition, and maybe that's why it meant more than he could say. 2 days passed before the story started spreading. It wasn't Moses who told anyone. It wasn't the Marine either. Stories like this didn't need a narrator. They moved on their own, carried on the quiet lips of those who'd been inside the diner, passed between phone calls, shared in whispers and Facebook posts, growing legs and a spine of their own. First it was the waitress. Marnie told her sister told her pastor. By that evening, Pastor Willard brought it up at Wednesday night prayer meeting, and someone there recorded his retelling on their phone. That clip, grainy and filled with the hum of folding chairs and murmured amens, went viral within the hour. An old soldier sat still while his honor was torn from his chest. Then another one, younger but cut from the same cloth, picked it up, gave no speech, gave no fight, just a salute, just that, and that was enough to silence the noise. People started asking questions. Who was he? Was the older man really a veteran? What kind of patch was it? Was the Marine his son? Had anyone gotten the names of the punks who did it? The internet didn't care if the answers came easy. It just needed a spark. And Moses Hadley's silence, caught on grainy footage from a teenager's TikTok in the corner booth, gave it plenty. By Thursday morning, the mayor's office had left 2 voicemails on Moses' landline. By Friday, the local VFW post commander was standing on his front porch, holding a plate of brownies and a proposal to throw an event in his honor. Moses didn't answer the door, didn't pick up the phone. He just sat in his back room, oiling the bolt of his old hunting rifle out of habit, not intention. Some men cleaned guns to prepare for conflict. Moses cleaned his because his hands didn't know what else to do when the world spun too fast. He'd been through a lot in his 78 years, but this sudden glare of attention, that was new. He'd fought in jungles and buried brothers. He'd stood at attention in funeral detail when no family showed. He'd driven halfway across the country to visit graves that were cleaner than the streets outside his apartment. But attention, this kind of spotlight, he didn't like it. It felt too loud, like it had teeth. Meanwhile, back at Clyde's diner, things had shifted. Folks who usually came in for coffee and gossip now came to sit quietly in Moses' booth, though of course they wouldn't dare take it if he was there. But when it sat empty, like a pew before a sermon, people would leave letters, challenge coins, even one folded flag in a plastic display case left by a young man who didn't leave his name. Clyde put up a sign near the register, "Veterans Eat Free," in honor of Sergeant Moses Hadley. No one argued. Even the old-timers who'd been coming there since before Clyde took over, crusty men with stubborn politics and louder mouths, even they nodded slowly and muttered, "'Bout time," before going back to their scrambled eggs. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for the right moment to strike its next chord, the Marine came back. No fanfare, no entourage. Just walked through the door like he'd left his wallet behind. Clyde recognized him first and gave a tight nod. "Coffee?" he asked. "Sure," said the Marine. That was all. He sat at the counter this time, not at the table. Didn't ask for Moses, didn't seem to expect anything. But people watched. They whispered. And when Moses did walk in sometime around 10:30, still wearing that jacket, same tear, same posture, the room didn't fall silent this time. It just held its breath. The two men locked eyes for a second. Then the Marine stood again, just like before. Same reverence. But this time he extended something, a small, rectangular black case. Moses didn't move at first. The Marine cleared his throat. "Repaired," he said, voice quiet. "Had it stitched by someone who knew what it meant." Moses walked up to him, slow and deliberate. He opened the case. Inside was the patch. Same thread, same wear, but now restitched, cleaned, edges reinforced with care. And beside it another item, a unit coin, first cav, clean polished. Not new, just respected. Moses looked at the man, eyes narrowing. Not in judgment, but in appraisal. "You earned that?" he asked softly, gesturing toward the coin. "Yes, sir." "Full? You carry it?" "Always." Moses nodded. Then, in a move so subtle it almost passed unnoticed, he removed the repaired patch from the case, rolled back his jacket sleeve, and slowly began stitching it back on. Right there, in front of everyone. He didn't ask for help. His fingers weren't fast, but they were steady. The room watched in silence. When it was done, he looked back up at the Marine. "Name?" he asked. "Corporal Travis McNeil." Moses held out his hand. They shook, one calloused hand to another, across generations of service. "You ever need something?" Moses said. "You come find me." "He already did," Travis replied. They didn't sit together. They didn't swap war stories. They just nodded, the kind of nod men give when the world doesn't need to understand what passed between them. But something shifted after that, something permanent. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a symbol, a message. Not everything had to be shouted to be heard. Not every hero needed medals or cameras. Some wore old jackets and kept to themselves. Until the day came when the world remembered to look their way. The town square hadn't hosted a ceremony in nearly a decade. Not since the last 4th of July event that got rained out and forgotten. But on this Saturday morning the folding chairs were out, the speakers wired up, and the local Boy Scout troop was busy tying red, white, and blue ribbons to the old oak trees lining the park. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what this was for. Not a parade, not a fundraiser. This was something different. Moses Hadley didn't know what to make of it. He stood at the edge of the square, hands deep in the pockets of his jacket, the same one, patch now reattached, the tear no longer fresh but part of the story. Beside him stood Corporal Travis McNeil, silent as ever. The two had met several times since that day at the diner. Sometimes it was a quiet coffee, other times a wordless walk to the war memorial. They didn't say much, but they understood each other in a way that didn't require small talk. The mayor stepped onto the small stage. Nervous, squinting in the sunlight, he adjusted the microphone with clumsy fingers. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "Today we honor one of our own, someone who's walked these streets for years without asking for anything in return." Moses shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. "This isn't just about military service," the mayor continued, warming into his words. "It's about dignity, about quiet strength, about standing up without raising your voice, and how sometimes the deepest acts of courage are the ones no one ever sees." There was a murmur of agreement in the crowd. Several heads turned toward Moses. He hated that. But he stayed. Then the mayor stepped aside and a young woman took his place. Someone Moses had never seen before. She was maybe in her late 20s, hair pulled into a bun, wearing a crisp blue blazer, and holding a plaque. "My name is Ellie Barnes," she said. "My grandfather served in the same division as Mr. Hadley. I never got to meet him, but when I heard the story, when I saw the footage from the diner, I saw my grandfather in that man. In his silence." She turned to Moses, eyes wet but unwavering. "I just want to say thank you." Moses didn't speak, didn't move. Then Travis stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. He turned toward the crowd, and for the first time since he'd arrived in town, he spoke clearly. "There's something Mr. Hadley didn't tell anyone. That patch, the one that was ripped, wasn't just any patch. It came from his last deployment, his final mission, one where he carried a wounded squad mate 5 miles through enemy fire. They gave him a silver star. He never told anyone about it. He sewed the patch on himself the day he came home." The crowd was silent. Moses glanced down, then away, jaw tight. Travis held out the cloth and unwrapped it slowly. A shadow box. Inside it, a replica of the torn patch, framed beside the repaired original. Below it, a metal plate engraved with a simple line: "For those who stand quietly, so others can live loudly." The mayor took it, hand shaking slightly, and turned it toward Moses. "We'd like to hang this in the town hall," he said, "right near the entrance, where people can see it when they walk in, so they remember what honor looks like." Moses stared at the box. He didn't nod, he didn't smile, but he stepped forward and took the box in his hands, held it a moment, then handed it back, and that was enough. Applause broke out. Not the kind people give at ball games or school recitals. This was slower, measured, like a heartbeat, like the town exhaling after years of forgetting what mattered. Afterward, people lingered. Veterans approached him, some in wheelchairs, others with canes or service dogs. They didn't say much, just nodded, pressed palms, shared that quiet bond of those who've seen things the world can't imagine and lived long enough to carry them. Kids from the local high school came up with notebooks, asked him to speak in their history class. He said no to all of them, until one girl, no more than 15, handed him a folded paper with trembling hands. "My brother's in the army," she said. "He wanted me to thank you." Moses took the paper, slipped it into his pocket, the same pocket where the patch had once been. Clyde brought coffee to the ceremony, courtesy of the diner. Marnie passed out little American flag pins shaped like hearts. And Travis? He stood with Moses the whole time, like a shadow made of purpose. Later that evening, long after the square had cleared and the folding chairs were stacked, Moses returned to his corner booth. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The town had already heard him loud and clear. He sipped his coffee, looked out the window, thought of those who hadn't made it home, of the weight stitched into fabric, of the sound of silence when it finally means something. And in the reflection on the glass, beside the ghost of his own face, he saw Travis sit down across from him. 2 generations, 2 warriors. No fanfare, no medals, just respect, earned and returned.